Hey, greetings everyone. It's GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we read the third chapter in the Sylvanas novel, where we're just kind of seeing her as a youth and the family dynamic that she has with her nuclear family, how her mom is a stern, fierce mom, and her dad is she's closer to her dad, and he's a very diplomatic, understanding dad, and how her older sister is just starting to chafe, which maybe be opening the door for what we're going to do here. She's starting to chafe at her role that's being thrust upon her as future Ranger General, and I think that's what Sylvanas becomes. And the younger sister is more lighthearted, and then the baby brother they all love, who's like a musical prodigy. So stay a while and listen to Chapter 4, where we see how this unfolds. Again, Verath said, Area Sunfire was known for his first-hand account of the creation of the Sunwell. No, he did not write about the Sunwell. He wrote the Troll Histories, volumes 5 through 7. His grandfather, Sunfire the Elder, wrote 1 through 4. And Sylvanas let out a sound of extreme exasperation. I understand why you want me to study ancient battles, she said. Strategy is important, and I know why I have to be familiar with the geography of our kingdom. But this younger elder, first of her name, the 15th, the one wearing the blue cloak in that portrait, how in the world do you keep them all straight? And more important, why? We have been over this, her father said, pouring a cup of wine for each of them and handing her a goblet. The Lassians are extremely proud of their ancestry, Sylvanas muttered. And, therefore, understanding and appreciating those legacies makes them more malleable to negotiations. Sylvanas took a sip of the wine and rubbed her eyes with the heel of one hand. This is just, she groped for words, catering to egos. My dear girl, Verath said, his eyes twinkling over the rim of the goblet as he took a sip, what do you think politics is? You cannot accomplish anything unless people come to the table. You can accomplish a great deal with a quiver of arrows and a bow, Sylvanas replied. I am officially a Farstrider now. Why can't I just be that? Because, as I have said before, an idle mind makes mischief, he answered with his customary kind honesty, and Illyria will eventually become their Ranger General, despite her current uncertainty. You know I hold the Farstriders in the greatest esteem, Sylvanas, and I would gamble my life there are none who could surpass them in this whole world of ours at what they do. But you, my sweet child, are not a follower. You are a leader, and if you were to live solely as a Farstrider, you would chafe and languish, or else rebel. Sylvanas frowned. What he said was true. But, she said, hunting for words as she might hunt a wild creature, my soul is in the forest. Flowery words for her, but they were true. She was never so alive as when she was on the chase, never so focused as when she took aim at her quarry. Beautiful as Windrunner's Spire was, Eversong Forest was more so for her. The smell of trees and grass and blooming things of life tethered her to this world. We named you for the beautiful woods of our homeland, and you have proved that naming true. I am not asking you to leave the Farstriders. He held up his hands in mock horror, and she chuckled slightly. But come with me from time to time, eh? Observe and learn. Verath patted her head as he had done so often when she was a child. Things may be changing from the way they have always been. Woo! Sorry, guys. So that's a good, this is showing, because you have to realize Sylvanas is more than just a future Ranger General. She's one of the future leaders of the Horde and future leaders of the Horde. So she has to have a political side to her, and this is cool. We're seeing the genesis of that. The portal, Sylvanas asked. You mean what the scouts are saying about green monsters coming out of a magical gate? When you have lived as long as I have, you will know that every bit of information is worth investigating, no matter how preposterous it sounds. Skepticism, of course, is healthy. That sharp mind of yours, as long as it is an open one, would be useful to your kingdom. That sharp tongue, however," he added, his eyes twinkling, "must learn to appreciate the benefits of silence." "Now I know I am not suited to this," Sylvanas returned, and he laughed. "On the contrary," her father replied, "the king has many, too many, who are eager to tell him exactly what he wants to hear. Fortunately, Anasterion is wise and treasures those bold enough to speak truth to him. That is why he is a fine king." It was not Anasterion whom she minded, though. The king was old, but still quick-witted and strong. He had seen much, and from all she could tell, he was a good and universally admired ruler. It was the court she despised, all frippery and frivolity, the sort perfectly embodied by Lord Southrill. Sylvanas sighed. "I will come to Anasterion's court," she said, "until he throws me out too." Sylvanas tried, she really did, to be the apt pupil her father so clearly wanted her to be, but she found herself missing some of the more exciting activities, stealing away for spur-of-the-moment scouting missions, hunts, and sometimes simple archery practice with her two favorite forest riders, who along with her were rapidly becoming known as the Trio. They were obedient to their ranger general, courteous to the heir apparent, and yet somehow carved out their own unit. Their personalities complemented one another. Lorthamar, the pensive one, Halduron, the merry one, and Sylvanas, the mischievous one. So I think it's weird that she wasn't with those other two in the last story we read, The Blood of the Highborn. She noticed that the future Ranger General was doing something similar. When she had the chance, Illyria and a handful of others, Varana, Relian, Talthrasar, and Auric, among others, slipped away on their own. Sylvanas had no idea what they were up to, but it was clear that a rift, subtle and courteous, was forming between those who followed Larissa and those who gravitated toward Illyria. The only thing that superseded hours spent with the trio was when Lyrath was available between practicing and performing. True to his promise to her, he always made time for her, even though he was kept very busy in Silvermoon. Kael'thas had insisted he move to the artist's quarters and begin a formal apprenticeship, and Sylvanas suspected the title of royal musician would be bestowed upon her brother sooner rather than later. Sometimes they went to the family spot in Eversong, other times they visited the beach below the spire. If the weather was fair, they swam. If not, they walked and collected seashells. One day in the heat of the afternoon, they sought out the coolness of the ocean, shucking off their shoes and outer garments. It was low tide, and, as he always did, Lyrath made a point of checking to see if any stranded creature was stuck in a little tide pool. It seemed there was at least one today, and Lyrath carefully bore the flailing little fish in cupped hands to the water. She watched as he placed his latest rescue safely into the ocean and followed it, walking, then running into the surf to dive straight through an oncoming wave. We hunt creatures, Sylvanas thought, and he saves them. She took a quick dip herself in the cool, soothing sea, then stretched out on the sand to dry off. She allowed her eyes to close and her mind to wander. In a few weeks' time, the Remembrance, the anniversary of the final battle in the Troll Wars, would be celebrated. Anasterion Sunstrider, wielding the powerful magical blade Philomelorn, had slaughtered so many trolls that it was said a tide of blood crested the walls of Zulaman. Sylvanas always wondered what it would have been like to fight in those battles, had discussed the strategies with her father many an evening. Unfortunately, her only battle around the Remembrance would be getting fitted for a ball gown. Her eyes fluttered open. Sylvanas peered in confusion at the glorious sunset, then realized her clothes were completely dry. She'd thought only to rest, not nap, and was annoyed that she had squandered her time with Lyrath snoring on the beach. She got to her feet and brushed off the sand, looking around for him. He was nowhere to be seen. Had he noticed her drowsing and returned to the spire alone? That didn't seem like him. A prickle of concern stirred, and Sylvanas padded barefoot toward the waves lapped at the shore, shading her eyes against the sun and peering at silvery blue water. Nothing. He really should have known better than to walk off without letting her know. She would give him a piece of her mind for making her worry. Sylvanas went to fetch her overdress and shoes, but stopped. Lyrath's shoes were still there. Her mouth went abruptly dry. "Lyrath," she called, her voice cracking, sprinting back to the water, her feet barely touching the damp sand, praying to see an arm rise out of the waves to let her know he was fine. Something was floating on the surface, something not moving, bobbing with the waves, a form with bright blonde hair spreading out like a flowing gold wave of its own. Lyrath! Terror surged through Sylvanas, quickly quelled and harnessed into action. She launched herself into the water, using her fear to propel herself forward faster than she had ever swam before. Lyrath was floating face down, terrifyingly still. Time seemed to slow, but then there he was, and she flipped him face up, and Lyrath's blue eyes opened. "Thank you for the rescue, Lady Moon," he said, mirth in his voice. Fear bled out of her, leaving her weak with relief for a heartbeat before anger rushed to take fear's place. Releasing him at once, she glared at him as he floated before her, laughing, completely safe, not at all drowned, and she punched his shoulder. "Ow!" He was still laughing, even as he rubbed the spot. "I'm so glad you're all right," Sylvanas said, "so I can drown you myself. You scared me half to death, you wretch. How did you even go so long without breathing?" "What do you think happens to lungs when you play wind instruments for hours a day?" he asked, treading water in front of her. "It's the perfect prank." "You're very bad at pranks, little Lord's son. Never pull one on me again." Sylvanas tried to keep it light, but he who knew her so well could see he had truly upset her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice and eyes kind. "I did not know it would distress you so much." And just like that, the anger and the fear both receded, and Sylvanas reached out to hug him, resting her head for a moment on his shoulder, feeling ocean-chilled skin, hearing breath and heartbeats. He returned the embrace, whispering an apology again. Sylvanas thought back to when she had put the wound wood in the punch. The boys thought they had been poisoned. Suddenly it didn't seem so funny. She released him and took a deep breath. "You know," she said, "maybe we should both stop playing pranks." "Maybe we should," he agreed. "Except, of course, on people who really deserve them." "Of course," Lyrath replied as they both began to strike out for the shore. "Except for them." "The last time I wore a formal gown to a party, things did not go well," Sylvanas pointed out. She, her sisters, and her mother were in a carriage, a rare thing for them. Sylvanas had tried and failed to persuade them all to simply ride their dragon hawks, or in her mother's case, the exquisitely beautiful horse given to her by King Anasterion himself. But Larissa had held firm. They would arrive together with appropriate transport, and that would be the end of it. "Do not remind me," Larissa said. "Your father has asked us all to go, and go we shall. None of us enjoy this, but we are windrunners, and we have a duty to the crown." Out of her mother's view, Sylvanas rolled her eyes. Verissa stifled a giggle. At least her mother had allowed her daughters to choose their preferred styles and colors of dress. Illyria had selected green, Verissa red, and Sylvanas blue. They're like Alvin and the Chipmunks. All were full length. Illyria's had an attached cloak, Verissa's an embroidered bodice, while Sylvanas simply requested hers have no sleeves. If she couldn't wear her armor, then at least she would not have to deal with excessive fabric. Larissa didn't reprimand either Sylvanas or Verissa. There was an odd look on her face, a sorrow, a softness that Sylvanas had never seen there before. Verissa, of course, picked up on it right away. "Is something wrong, Mother?" "No, my sweet girl," Verissa said. Sylvanas blinked. She had a vague childhood memory of endearments, and she had seen how tender Larissa had been with Lyrath, but it had been a long time since their mother's face had worn anything save a stern expression. "But I am a little sad. All of you are adults now, even you, even Lyrath. I still see you in my mind's eye as children, but you are such no longer." Verissa, sitting next to her, linked her arm around Larissa's and laid her head on her mother's silk-covered shoulder. "That may be," Larissa said, "but we are still here. We're not leaving you." Sylvanas stayed silent, but her gaze flickered to Illyria. Their eyes met. Then Illyria glanced out the window. Neither of them said a word. Their father greeted them at the stairs to the Court of the Sun. "Well," Lyrath said, surveying them with a smile, "I had almost forgotten what you four looked like underneath the dirt you seem to acquire. Turns out you're all quite beautiful." They were, Sylvanas agreed. Illyria wore her hair long, letting the golden tresses flow over the green cape that swayed gracefully behind her. Verisa looked every inch the noblewoman she was, her hair pale as moonlight, and the gems on her bodice glittering like stars. Sylvanas was drawing looks because her arms were bare for all to see, and while her vanity was somewhat stoked by the attention, for the most part she could not have cared less. "Can we see Lyrath?" she asked. "Not just yet," Verisa replied. Sylvanas straightened, smiling at her admirers, and followed her parents inside. There was the greeting line, of course, and although Sylvanas hated it, she already knew everyone. Tonight was very important to her father, and she would not embarrass him. Anasterion, whose famous battle of the evening celebrated, cut a commanding figure as always. Elegant and poised, long white hair flowing down his back, he was resplendent in his heavy jeweled robe of deep crimson and bright gold. The sword of legend, Philomelorn, was sheathed at his side. Magi, of course, were always present in large numbers, given their importance to the people. Grand Magister Bellavir of the powerful house of Salinar had a cluster of people around him nearly constantly, namely his trusted colleagues Romath and Darkon Drathir. Though Lorthamar was fond of Darkon, something about him rubbed Sylvanas the wrong way. She did not like how he looked at her, eyes glowing, perfect features in shadow beneath the sweeping brim of his hat. It was one thing to be found attractive, it was another to be regarded as a meal to be devoured. "You look stunning, Lady Sylvanas, as always," Darkon said, his voice rich and smooth. "And you, Magister, never change." The words sounded polite, and self-focused as Darkon was, he took them as the compliment they most definitely were not. Romath nodded at her. "Lady Sylvanas," he said. "Magister Romath," she replied, and then moved on. Romath, while more pleasant than Darkon, was too cold and serious for her liking. The line continued with various nobility and court members, and Sylvanas' mouth soon began to ache from the forced smiles. She brightened at the chance to meet some of the court artists. Most of them knew her primarily as Lyrath's sister, which was unexpected and oddly charming. The musicians, of course, were currently busy performing, but Sylvanas hoped to meet some of them later. Once she was done with the line, Sylvanas was besieged by hopeful suitors and giggling ladies who sought to curry favor with the family. Then finally the myriad cousins of one variety or other of the Windrunners themselves. Out of all of them, other than the artist, the only person Sylvanas cared for at all was Priestess Liadrin, although sometimes the priestess's gentle demeanor tried her patience. That's two of the people from our story now. Well, three, actually, so the only one we haven't seen is the male priest. So I like how she's tapped into that story. She really does her homework to read this stuff. She being the author. At one point when going in search of beverages for Verisa and Verath, Sylvanas found herself standing next to Lord Southril. "My lord," she said as sweetly as she could. Southril turned with a practiced, pleasant expression on his face, which shifted to utterly, genuinely annoyed. "How pleasant to see you here," said Sylvanas. Clearly Southril did not share the sentiment, and his frown deepened. He attempted to move past her. "Your pardon," he said, but Sylvanas wasn't done. "Still throwing your famous parties," she said, finishing her beverage. "I do hope so. We wouldn't know, of course, as Lyrath hasn't been performing at them for some time, and the rest of us have been extremely busy with court matters." "And yet," came a smooth tenor voice behind her, "somehow I have not encountered you. You've grown quite a bit since I last saw you, Lady Sylvanas." Southril alternately paled and flushed. "Your Highness," he said, bowing deeply. The Prince of Quel'Thalas acknowledged the obeisance with a smile and nod, but his attention was on Sylvanas. As he plucked a cup of wine from a golden serving tray, he saluted her with it. A smile played around his mouth. "No wound would in this goblet, I trust." "Not this time," Sylvanas quipped, adding quickly, "Your Highness." She accepted 2 fresh cups and dropped a curtsy. "You'll pardon me, but my father and sister are waiting." "They can wait a moment longer," Kael'thas said. "Your parents are truly remarkable individuals. While everyone knows about the Battle of the 7 Arrows, of course, few are as aware of the good your father has done the kingdom." "Battling trolls is assuredly more noticeable than battling other politicians," Sylvanas replied. She refused to show her irritation at another reminder of her mother's nigh-legendary status. But sometimes the battles in comfortable chambers over delicacies and beverages turn out to be the more important and long-lasting. Quel'Thalas is very blessed indeed to have both of your parents. And, he said, inclining his golden head graciously, they have borne equally remarkable children. I am grateful to be able to borrow your brother as often as I have. He is quite popular at court. Our family appreciates your patronage, Sylvanas said dutifully, adding, Lirath is very good at what he does. As are all of you. Your father tells me you are a budding diplomat. She laughed. My father, I fear, lives in hope. I am not diplomatic at all. Kael'thas missed or chose to miss the wordplay. My own father seldom stirs from his kingdom without cause. I, on the other hand, enjoy encountering other races, humans, gnomes, dwarves, and am honored to serve alongside other magi in Dalaran. Our land is glorious, to be certain, and I love it dearly, but there is so much more to Azeroth. Beautiful, much of it, but also deadly, and to be fought against. You may yet flower into statecraft. I would imagine it requires similar skills to hunting, timing, preparation, patience. Sylvanas smiled despite herself. In a completely genuine tone, she said, laying traps, killing cleanly, skinning. Her apparent sincerity baffled the prince, and for a long moment he was clearly struggling between laughing at the joke and trying to find a way to politely answer a possibly serious question. Sylvanas desperately wanted to find out which he would choose, but that famous hunter-diplomat skill called patience eluded her, as she had used up all of hers on Southril. A smile cracked her seemingly earnest expression, and she laughed. Kael'thas followed suit, still uncomfortable. You are a most unusual woman, even for a windrunner, he said gamely. So he's flirting with Sylvanas. He flirted with Jaina. He just goes around flirting with all the heroes of the land, or main figures. I will take that as a compliment, Your Highness, but I really must be getting back. Sylvanas curtsied again and moved to thread her way to the crowd that inevitably gathered whenever the prince was doing, well, anything. Someone jostled Sylvanas. She stumbled and caught herself, but sacrificed some of the wine in one of the cups on the robe of the Prince of Quel'Thalas. Her eyes widened and she glanced up. Kael'thas stared down at his saturated robe, not angry, but assuredly bemused. Your Highness, I am so sorry, she said, and meant it. She should have stopped them, but the quip escaped her. At least it matches the color of your robe. A chuckle, uncertain and ready to be shushed by a single glance from the prince, rippled through the crowd. It did match the robe, so accurately it might have been spilled water. Gold and red, those were the colors of the prince. Sylvanas often wondered if he wore anything but that, and the purple robes of the Dalaran Magi. Now, however, was definitely not the time to ask. She hurried away, hearing Southril's voice as the noble said, Oh my, Prince, how clumsy that Windrunner girl is. I swear Lord Vareth just lets his children run around like wild beasts. And with that barb, Sylvanas realized that it was likely well past time for her to leave the party. She returned to where she had left her father and Verisa, looked around and observed that they had given up on her and were dancing. Sylvanas smiled a little. The two true diplomats of the family, both white-haired and kind-eyed. A familiar voice caught her ear. It's called Feeble Old Man, Helderon was saying. Sylvanas knew exactly what he was talking about and had to smile. He was chatting with Vorithil and Jiri, who had been a brand new recruit on the day Illyria had set out to hunt a springpaw. She still looked quite young and was clearly very interested in the story. That hardly sounds threatening, Vorithil said. That's the point, Helderon exclaimed. I dress in an old tattered cloak, you see. My head's covered, I'm hunched over. I'm leaning on my spear as if it's a staff. The trolls think I'm easy prey, and when they attack, half of them are full of arrows before they even reach me. Oh, you have forest riders hidden in the trees, Jiri said. Yes, Helderon said gleefully, and I throw off the cape and impale the trolls with my spear. Vorithil had narrowed his eyes skeptically. That seems a bit elaborate. How often does it work? Helderon grinned. Let's just say no troll has survived to tell his brethren of the trick. You must be parched after bragging so much, Helderon, Lorthamar teased. Sylvanas turned to smile at him as he stepped beside her. It turned into an annoyed scowl as her friend plucked both beverages from her hands and offered them to Jiri and Helderon. Sylvanas sighed. Well, that's what Father and Verisa get for not being patient, she said, intercepting Helderon's goblet and taking a sip from it before handing it to her friend. Kale's new red stain is going to be all the rage in fashion soon, Lorthamar said with a perfectly straight face. Sylvanas winced, then smiled. I could not help but hear the latest gossip, Lorthamar said. I discounted utterly. Oh, do tell, Sylvanas said wryly. It seems, he continued, that all the nobles will be gathered for a royal wedding soon. None other than the union of two great houses will do for the gossips. It seems our prince has set his sights on Lady Sylvanas Windrunner. What? After blurting out the single word, Sylvanas dropped her voice to a soft murmur. That's ridiculous. I don't know. Queen Sylvanas has a nice ring to it, Lorthamar deadpanned. And we know how much you love formal events, meaningless chit-chat, and... Please, Sylvanas groaned. He is nice enough, I suppose, and has certainly been very good to our family, especially Lirath. I'll always be grateful for that. But I cannot think of a worse fate than being married to a prince. Leave my forest for stilted conversation over punch. Become an accessory worn on the royal arm rather than pinned to the royal chest. Completely change who I am. Dress in gaudy formal robes to match his. Be paraded out to perform like a trained animal at stupid parties like... Sylvanas stopped abruptly. Neither ranger was looking at her, and both of them had gone noticeably paler. Oh no. Fortunately for the both of us, Lady Sylvanas, came the smooth voice, I pay little attention to gossip. Rest assured that I cannot imagine this fantastical event either. Since you are clearly not having a pleasant time at this stupid party, please do feel free to excuse yourself. You've done quite enough for the crown this evening. Sylvanas felt her cheeks grow hot. She dropped a curtsy and turned to leave. Kale caught her arm for a moment, then said softly for her ears only, Had I asked for your hand, the last thing I would wish would be to change who you are. Then he was gone. Sylvanas had not thought it possible to feel worse. Before she was red with simple embarrassment, but now she burned with shame. She felt dozens of eyes boring into her as her friends regarded her with awkward empathy. It wasn't really the prince himself she disliked, though, truth be told, she didn't know him all that well. It was the falseness of court life, the posturing, the expectations, the pretense. But Sylvanas couldn't explain that. She couldn't do anything at all except murmur, Excuse me, and leave. Poor Kalthus, he just is shut down with all the girls he tries to hit on. Poor dude. Even though, I don't know, poor, he's a king of a kingdom, or will become one, and things don't go well for him, and he's really he causes himself it. There's a reason why he's like a raid boss. All right, cool. We got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. I thank everybody so much, as always, for watching, for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all next time on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft.